going to start the evening with a presentation by Dr. Phil Bedient, but we will then, after the presentation, have the panel convene at the table. But I would like to go ahead and introduce all the participants to get started. And if you could please to stand up briefly when I introduce you. Joe Jaworski served 3 terms on the Galveston City Council before being elected mayor in 2010. In 2005, Jaworski helped lead the team that faced Hurricane Rita and won praise for his role in that region's emergency preparations and response to the devastating storm. Jaworski earned his bachelor's from North Carolina's Davidson College and his law degree from the University of Texas at Austin. He served as law clerk to U.S. Fifth Circuit of Appeals Judge John Brown, and is currently a partner in the Jaworski Law Firm, headquartered in Galveston, and specializing in maritime law. A former chairman of the City of Galveston Ethics Commission, a trustee of both Galveston's Park Board and Quarters Board, Jaworski is a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum and a director of the Texas Lyceum.
Oh, yes. Hello again. Hello.
Ed Emmett is the Harris County Judge since 2007, a member of the Texas House of Representatives from 1979 to 1987. Judge Emmett was chairman of the Committee on Energy and a member of the Transportation Committee, and represented the state on numerous national committees relating to energy and transportation policy. He served on the Interstate Commerce Commission for 3 years after being nominated by the first President Bush in 1989. Judge Emmett is also director of Harris County's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, a role that took on special significance when Hurricane Ike struck the Gulf Coast in September 2008. Judge Emmett attended Bel Air High School, and he graduated from Rice University in '71 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics, and from the University of Texas at Austin in '74 with a Master of Public Affairs degree. Judge Emmett. And Phil Bedient is the Herman Brown Professor of Engineering and former chair of the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Rice University, where he has taught since 1975. He teaches and performs research in surface water hydrology and flood prediction systems and radar-based flood alert. Over the past 35 years, he has worked on hydrologic problems, including major floodplain studies, water quality assessments, and hydrologic modeling for watersheds in Texas, Florida, and Louisiana. He has developed a real-time flood alert system for the Texas Medical Center based on the use of NEXRAD radar data. Dr. Bedient directs the SSPEED Center at Rice for severe storm prediction, consisting of several universities in the Gulf Coast area, which has funding to address the impacts of Hurricane Ike in the Houston area. He received 3 degrees from the University of Florida, including a PhD in environmental engineering sciences. And I should also point out that these events could just as easily be called 10 years after, since we are marking the anniversary of Tropical Storm Allison as well. I'll ask Dr. Bedient to come to the podium and start this with a presentation of his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here tonight and honored to be on this very distinguished panel. I feel like I've been very, very fortunate at Rice, and indeed, thanks for reminding us of Tropical Storm Allison. That was a watershed event almost 10 years ago to the day, and that was certainly a day that changed my life, along with Katrina and Rita and Ike. And because of those events, very, very significant events in and around the Houston area, and as an outgrowth primarily from Katrina, we began to put together a research center that is titled here, and I'm the director of the center, but it's a group of 15 amazing experts from about 8 different universities, and several are represented here tonight from the University of Houston. Let's see if we can get this working now. So the center was established formally in 2007. It is basically set to address hurricane and surge and flood impacts. And it was funded in 2009 by the Houston Endowment with a very nice 2-year grant that we've been working on. The goals of the center, I think, relate to the theme of this evening. We're attempting to address lead time and accuracy of storm prediction, deliver that information in real time. And a second major goal now is to evaluate structural and non-structural alternatives for the upper Texas coast as they, again, come through recovery and redevelopment issues after these major events, in particular Hurricane Ike. This is just a broad brush list of the participants and the partners. First of all, bringing together the University of Texas and Texas A&M University all at the same table to work together is a miracle in and of itself, and I'm very proud of that grouping. It's been a wonderful relationship. We even have contributors from LSU, and we allowed them to come across the border and work with us. In addition, we also have companies, as indicated here, and these are all participants, as well as the Houston Galveston Area Council, has been a very, very strong supporter of us literally from day one. And of course the Texas Medical Center, where a lot of this work began many, many years ago. So here are some of the current projects that we're working on within the center, and you can get information on that on our website. I won't bore you with those details. But we do have some outreach programs to the city of Brownsville, in addition to the work we're doing here in Houston. A lot of words on this slide, and there'll be a test on this later. I leave that to you. I know it's kind of a lot of words. So we'll just say that we're heavily involved in trying to understand the relationships between sort of disasters and critical infrastructure, surge flooding. We're working closely with the University of Texas Center for Space Research on real-time prediction of surge. We've made some major breakthroughs in that if there's another storm that enters the Gulf, we will actually have surge information coming in real time as the storm enters the Gulf. These are major advances that have taken place since Ike. So we're trying to address disconnection between floodplain mapping and storm surge risk and some current building practices, and we're also assessing natural flood abatement strategies with respect to wetlands and marshes. So all of these are part of what we're doing within the SPEED Center. We've had a great history of storms in this area. It's interesting and ironic that, if you look back all the way back to 1960, which is, roughly 50 years, we've had these 6 major, if you will, watershed events that befell the area and caused major damage. Probably none so great as Hurricane Ike. We have within the center, again, this amazing ability to predict these storms with computer models that run for the entire Gulf of Mexico and portions of the Atlantic Ocean as well, and are able to zoom in and provide information, detailed information, within Galveston Bay and up into the Houston Ship Channel. Comparisons were made between these computer models and the actual measured values at some 36 points during Ike, and the measurements were amazingly accurate compared to what was seen there. But the Ike aftermath, especially down in the Galveston-Bolivar area, was just enormous and absolutely devastating. And it's the kind of event that none of us will ever forget. And these sorts of damaging photographs remind us all too well of the issues. So there are a lot of things within the center that we have been evaluating. I'm flashing through some samples here these are some options that are being looked at within the center and evaluated in terms of maybe some special levee activities within and around the Galveston area. We're considering a Houston Ship Channel gate as protection of the entire Houston Ship Channel complex, simply because a major hit there with major storm surge in and around the 20 to 25 foot range could essentially level this area and put it out of commission for a long period of time, causing many, many billions in damage. We're also looking at some limited options for areas in and around Kemah, Clear Lake area, and down toward Galveston Island. So these are all options we're looking at. There's some consideration of recreational areas in and around the Galveston complex and Bolivar complex. There are an awful lot of existing lowlands, existing wetland areas that will probably never be built on or should never be built on. And the idea is to try to organize these into one overall strategy. So with all of that going on in the SPEED Center, tonight what I want to do is come to you, and again, these are ideas that have come to us from a variety of sources, but and there probably are lots of other questions that we could ask, but we came up with kind of a list that we would hope the other panelists would address in terms of communication and special needs, transportation, evacuation, reentry, power and backup power, and recovery after the storm. These are the general topical areas that we will be sort of addressing this evening, along with others. And so, for example, the issue is, since Ike, how have we improved on our communication abilities with respect to, the return after the storm, command, control, and communication, and overall public awareness of the risk associated with hurricanes. In terms of identification and evacuation and coordination of special needs populations, it was a big issue during Ike with respect to the presence of nursing homes in flood-prone areas. How has that been addressed? And the good news is the mic's out, but it really doesn't matter. It's probably still coming. So these are issues that it would be interesting to hear what kind of progress we've made in that regard. Traffic evacuation reentry, we saw enormous improvements from Rita to Ike in terms of the evacuation. These are improvements that I think that we can all be proud of. It would be interesting to hear some of the details about future traffic management and clearance and electricity backups and all of that, fuel availability, all of these things that were addressed in great detail through Harris County and through the City of Galveston and the City of Houston, and how these have made improvements. Power and backup power relates in particular drinking water treatment plants and pumps and hospitals and critical gas stations, wastewater treatment plants and lift pumps. And so I know that the other panelists are just sitting here and are delighted to have these very simple group of questions laid out before them, but these are the true experts that I think can answer these questions and give us a sense of where we're going. And finally, recovery after the storm, critical supplies, public safety, the restoration of power, debris and waste management, and all of these issues. So, in a nutshell, what would happen out there if we were to have another major hit from one of these events, whether it's a tropical storm or whether it's a hurricane? In a lot of ways, a tropical storm can bring more rainfall. You might have 12 inches of rain in 15 hours. You might have the bayou coming out of its banks near the Texas Medical Center. How would we respond to that today? What would we do differently? With respect to hurricane tracks, here you see the original Hurricane Ike track and some computer modeling that we've been doing within the SPEED Center on Hurricane Ike at what we call point 7, which is sort of the worst case scenario. And if it hits at point 7, you end up with about a 19-foot storm surge in the Houston Ship Channel and about a 16-foot storm surge in and around Kemah. And so all of a sudden, what would you do to protect gasoline and the major Houston Ship Channel area under this type of event today? In other words, what could we do? What should we do? The drinking water supply, of course, is a major concern. It provides 350 million gallons of water a day to the community. Experts predict a worst-case scenario like a 0.7 hit would again create a 19-foot storm surge engulfing this major water plant. What are the backup options for addressing this type of issue? And what would we do if Houston's main source of drinking water is out of service? In other words, how does the system work to address this type of issue? Once again, worst case scenario hitting Kima would create about a 15-foot storm surge. What's been done to protect the area since Ike's 11.5-foot surge hit in 2008? What should we be working on? What should we be addressing? So this was kind of that infamous photograph, just rather amazing, that sort of says it all. And I think that may be my last slide. Now it's dark. So let me back up, and we'll just leave it there. And that completes my opening remarks, and I appreciate your attention.
And now we hear from Dr. Bedient, and we are going to continue with the opening remarks from our two other guests. So, Mayor Jaworski, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Well, that last picture was man versus nature, wasn't it? That was a man standing on the Galveston seawall, probably the safest place on the island for Hurricane Ike, to be honest with you. One lesson learned is that the Army Corps of Engineers back in the early 1900s did one admirable job. That seawall is our life force down there. Many other storms would have done so much more damage had that not been built. And Ike proved that even 100 years later, plus, the Galveston seawall held. So our water, as you know, came from the backside, from the bay, from the north end of the island. I live about 5 blocks from the port of Galveston at 11th and Winnie, Avenue G. And little did I know that my home was subject to that type of storm surge. It just didn't dawn on us. Well, good news is we had flood insurance, and we used it. That is something that a lot of people didn't have in Galveston. You'll remember in Hurricane Ike, over 70% of the entire island was underwater. The Gulf met the bay, and there was no Galveston Island. A lot of people own homes in Galveston that have been handed down from their parents. They don't pay a mortgage because they own it outright. Therefore, they didn't have to have windstorm or flood insurance. And we have a low area income in certain neighborhoods. People are arguing about whether to buy food versus medicine. Well, in that sort of scenario, you know they're not going to be paying $5,000 for a windstorm policy or $3,000 for a flood policy. So a lot of them weren't insured, which is why the slow pace of reconstruction and rehabilitation of these homes has to wend its way through the state program that was funded by Congress. So let me just take a moment and ask, how many of y'all have been to Galveston since Hurricane Ike? All right, good work. So I'm not going to ask those that haven't to raise their hand, but please come on down there, because I think what you'll find is we're doing very well. Some of the aspects of our recovery are very slow, but some of the things we've learned, we are never going to let this happen again to us. You might recall the moment before the intermission in Gone with the Wind, when Scarlett says, "I will never be hungry again," right? Remember that? Well, that's how I like to think of Galveston right now. We were caught flat-footed in one main respect, which is for decades we had failed to maintain our infrastructure. We had failed. We had failed to put money toward it, and we were holding things together by bandages and gum. So when the storm surge came to Galveston, it overtook our wastewater treatment plant. We have one main wastewater treatment plant completely destroyed offline. Water pump stations, water storage tanks, sewer lift stations, all destroyed. Which is why my predecessor, my dear friend Lida Ann Thomas, had a horrible decision to make. So you remember Rita in 2005, I was mayor pro tem. We had a beautiful evacuation to get out of Galveston County. Things got south at about 6:10, as you know, because people were scared, you know, and they had to get out of Houston. I don't blame them. I mean, the madness was prevalent. You know, the big storm's coming. But one has to wonder about that bus with the dear senior citizens who lost their life. That came from Bel Air. Now, what were they doing? Leaving. So thank God we have Judge Emmett, who remembers and says every chance he gets, and I'm glad you do, hunker down.
I don't say that anymore.
You don't say that? All right. He's going to speak in a minute. But the point is that Galveston needed to evacuate for Rita. I'll never forget Jack Colley, who was at that time, before he passed away, the head of emergency management for the state. And his sage advice was, everything in the path of this killer storm Rita will be completely destroyed. And of course he said that on one of these conference calls, and the blood drains from our face. The point I want to make is, Rita was a big evacuation for us, and it became a nightmare. So what happens in the next storm? Everyone stays. Unfortunately, 70% of our island was underwater, so we had some problems there. It's amazing we didn't have as much loss of life as we did. But the problem that Lida Ann Thomas had, my predecessor for Hurricane Ike, was telling people, don't come back. I mean, it's one thing to get them to leave. How about when you tell them, don't come back, there's nothing here for you? And we were off that island for close to 10 days. And that, 10 days, you know, that's basically spring break. Just imagine those seconds ticking away as you can't get back to your house. She made a lot of people angry. She did the right thing, though. I just hope that we're never put in that position again. So, Congress appropriated a great deal of disaster funds, which come through the state and then get given to the local governments. We're using that money to have our wastewater treatment plant completely redesigned. It's about an $80 to $90 million job, and it's not going to be done in a year, so keep your fingers crossed. We've got to keep the hurricanes out of the Gulf, you know, at least coming to Galveston. We need a few years to get this done. Water storage tanks, water lift stations, all brand new. I mean, we are putting over $200 million of non-housing infrastructure improvements in Galveston. That's the lesson learned. Don't be caught flat-footed. Keep an investment in your infrastructure. And out of this storm, frankly, there's a good thing happening. We're rebuilding Galveston. It's a brand new day.
Thank you. And Judge Emmett, if you could make your opening statement, please.
Opening statement makes it sound like it's a debate of some kind. Very debate-like. You know, there have been a lot of lessons learned from all of the storms, and I have to start by saying we're described as experts. I'm not really an expert. There are a lot of experts who deal with these issues. I'm kind of the face of the experts, if you will, which means I get credit for things and perhaps blame if things go wrong. Let's start with evacuation. As the mayor said, you know, Rita was a disaster when it came to the evacuation. But my predecessor, Judge Eccles, and all the people who work not just for Harris County, but in the whole region, realized that a lot of improvements needed to be made. And I won't go into great detail, but the biggest improvement, and we joke about hunker down all the time, the biggest improvement was it was pounded into my head from the day I took office that my job was to make sure people stayed where they were. They sheltered in place if they were not in danger of the storm surge. And I think if Bill White, Bill, you're not here, are you? If he were here, he would be the first to tell you that there was an unfortunate comment made in the Rita evacuation, and he made it when he said, if you've ever flooded, you might want to leave. Well, Allison was on people's mind. That's why people in places like Bel Air and around here evacuated. They remembered flooding in Allison. Well, that was a whole different event, and they should never have gotten on the highway in the first place. Well, since then, not only have we, I think, done a much better job of messaging, we now realize that a lot of the backups occurred in places like Giddings, places far removed from Houston, when we're very law-abiding. I have a good friend who's the state rep up in Lee County now, and he said it was hilarious. People would come to a stoplight and they'd stop. And traffic would back up until the little light changed. And now what we have is we have deputy sheriffs and constables who are assigned to specific intersections. They're all tied through a computer program, and we can tell you, are they on site? Are they where they're supposed to be? And that works a lot better. The contraflow lanes are in place. We didn't even use the contraflow lanes, however, in Hurricane Ike, largely because Galveston didn't evacuate, and I will be a little bit more critical of Mayor Jaworski's predecessor. And it wasn't necessarily her fault, but there had been a storm earlier that summer that had come our direction. She had called the evacuation, turned out to be a false alarm, and she didn't want to call it again. Yeah. He and I have had several conversations already. You know, you got to call an evacuation. I mean, if your mistake is it's a false alarm, okay. I'd rather be thrown out of office for a false alarm than have thousands of people dead because they didn't get off the island. So the evacuation, we learned a lot of lessons. We also learned about pre-positioning generators, pre-positioning fuel supplies. You know, most people don't realize you have a fairly small number of fuel jobbers who supply all the stations in this region, and they have to be the critical partners. It's not a government operation. We just have to work with them. What we can do a better job of, and this is what's going to be interesting in coming years, is how do we use the social networks that are out there now to get information out. It's nice to have stations that have fuel, but if people don't know which stations have the fuel or when they're going to have the fuel, then they end up driving around looking for it, and that defeats the whole purpose. So that's improving. The biggest lesson I learned was I need to have the cell phone of all the mayors. And, you know, the mayor of Houston, that was pretty easy. We were kind of joined at the hip. The mayor of Galveston, we were in contact with. But all those small towns that are along the bay, they too evacuated, and some of them I didn't have their cell phone numbers. So I'm making announcements that affect them, and I haven't talked to them, and they rightfully got angry at me, and lesson learned. Most of the lessons, though, from Ike came after the storm. We were pretty well geared, having gone through Katrina and Rita and a couple of false alarms in '07. We were geared to handle the storm itself. But then after everybody is absolutely bone tired, we wake up and go, oh my gosh, now we have to do the recovery. So now we're trying to develop actually a second team, and there's a few quick points about recovery. Pods, the famous pods. Points of distribution. That's now been streamlined. The state of Texas has now said the county judge decides where the pods are, when they're open, when they're closed. That doesn't mean that I'm going to say it's going to go here, 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 and here. I mean, obviously, I'm going to talk to the mayor of Baytown and say, if we put a pod there, where should it be? Though, you know, that has to be a cooperative effort. But we're also going to set up a different kind of pod. Let me give you one example of a lesson learned. We kept seeing the same cars go through time after time. And but I'm sure I wasn't the only one, made an assumption that these people are scamming the system. Why somebody wants to scam the system for more meals ready to eat, I don't know. But one guy we did catch, he was stocking his deer camp up in East Texas, but different circumstance. But what we found out was most of those people, though, were good Samaritans. They were going through multiple times and taking these meals back to people in their neighborhoods who could not get to the pod. So now we've worked out a system with Interfaith Ministries and Houston Food Bank and others to set up specific pods for people who come pick it up to take it back, and we can track where they're going, because not everybody can get to a pod. Damage assessment. This is going to sound critical. It's not. We worked with the previous administration's FEMA. Now they've all changed. Now we're going to have to do it all over again. But one of the problems is they had a first in, first out system, so that the first people to say they had damage, their claims got processed first. Well, through the hard work of certain members of Congress, a lot of those people were nowhere near the storm surge area. So people who lost a fence or a roof in northwest or north central Houston were in line ahead of the people down on the bay who lost their entire house. Well, that's just fundamentally wrong. I mean, clearly Galveston, Bolivar, people on the bay should be taken first, and so we'll have to work with FEMA on that. Final comment about lesson learned. Everybody was all worried about electricity. Electricity doesn't worry me. What worries me is drinkable water. We were very, very close to losing the water supply. And I wasn't happy to see the slide, by the way, that you put up here about the Galena Park Station. But it's not just that, it's the one that's all the way up near the Sewa Canal, because the pump station there, after Hurricane Rita, it only had one electric power serving it, and they were told to put in a backup. So they put in another overhead backup. Well, if one line's going to get blown down, two lines are going to get blown down. They needed to do it quite differently. So hopefully that's taken care of, which brings us back to evacuation. Same message is still going to be there. If you're in an area subject to storm surge, you need to leave. Otherwise, you need to stay where you are. And then Galveston does have the special circumstance of when do you allow people back in, as do the other small towns, and that will always be a city decision as far as I'm concerned. So.
The RDA volunteers will start passing out cards for anyone that wants to send some questions down here. Lonnie Hogan will start that question.
I want to start with Judge Emmett. From last Friday's State of the County address, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst introduced you as a leader who's the epitome of all that's good in Texas. And then during your address, you said, and I'm paraphrasing, Ike was an incredible experience of neighbor helping neighbor. And this is what makes Harris County so unique in the nation. Share with us what you think we as local and regional neighbors can do to help each other in preparation and response to storms.
Well, you know, part of it is just the personality of who we are. I was in the legislature in 1983 when Alicia hit and lived in Kingwood. I don't know if FEMA even existed then. We had thousands and thousands of trees down in Kingwood, and it never crossed anybody's mind that we were going to wait on the government to come help us. I mean, people had chainsaws, and some guy shows up with a crane. You know, obviously he was in that business. And we just organized groups in Kingwood and went street by street and cleared people's driveways and got trees off of their houses and those types of things. You saw that a lot in Ike. So part of it is just the personality difference between what you saw here and what you saw in New Orleans, for example. And of course they were devastated. What people have got to remember about New Orleans is it was not the hurricane itself that damaged the city. It was after the storm that, you know, the dikes failed and it was a flood. But the neighbor helping neighbor is part of everything we do. We have the Citizens Corps, for example. And the irony is, the Monday before Hurricane Ike hit, Mark Sloan and I were on the south lawn of the White House for Harris County, and it was kind of odd. I got to accept the award, but it was really for work done before I became county judge. But we're accepting the award for having basically the best volunteer system in America, and we got to put it to use a week later, and it actually did work. There was one line that came out that everybody remembers, the hunker down line. There was another one where Mayor White and I were there, and he was talking about neighbors helping neighbor, and he used the example, he said, even in River Oaks, neighbors are helping neighbors. And I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, well, actually that's neighbors' yard men helping neighbors' yard men.
Mayor Jaworski, question for you. As a new mayor for the city, and one currently positioned through the rebuilding efforts in Galveston. How do you connect to other new and long-term leaders to realize the projects that you're having to do in the city? And this also goes back to one of Judge Emmett's comments about government leaders are always constantly turning over, there's always new faces.
Right.
How do you work in that milieu to realize your key restoration projects?
One of the interesting things that has changed in Galveston is a sense that, we're an island. You know, it's a joke, right? We are not an island. We have embraced a regional sense of being. We really have to. There's a real sense after something this traumatic, and you think back to 1900, and there was no question Galveston would be rebuilt better than before. It was the Wall Street of the Southwest, etc. 2008, there was real anxiety. Maybe it was because within 48 hours of a 100-year storm, we were off the news. And the national recession / depression was all the rage. There's no time or point in getting a chip on your shoulder about it, but there was a real sense that Hurricane Ike, what was that? I mean, you go around the country and there's just not a whole lot of knowledge about it. But I will tell you this, Lonnie, that the fact is Congress appropriated over $6 billion for the 2008 storms, Gustav, Dolly, and Ike. You know, roughly a little over half goes to Texas, the other half goes to Louisiana. And Galveston has gotten its good fair share of that. The money is coming rather slow, so I have had to make very close relations with the executive directors of both the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, Mike Gerber, the now former executive director of the Texas Department of Rural Affairs, which handles all the non-housing money, like the money we're going to use to rebuild the wastewater treatment plant, the water lift stations, the sewer lift stations, etc., the water storage tanks. And then more importantly, HUD, who administers this bounty from Congress. And so going to Washington, going to Austin has become a frequent journey for me. Local leaders like Judge Emmett and mayors in the area are some of my good friends now, because we all know we're in this together. Talking about Galveston County in particular, there's an organization, Lonnie, called Galveston County Mayors and Council Members Association. And it's something we meet every 2 months, you know, to break bread and share stories and best practices. Houston Galveston Area Council is another, you know, I call it the most powerful place you've never heard of. And without these relationships in place, that we're done for. I will tell you that everybody remembers Galveston. Everybody loves Galveston down here. So I will just conclude that answer by saying that everyone is very supportive of Galveston. They want to know how we're doing. You know, I've always said there's a little piece of Galveston in everyone's heart, because you always have some memory about a good time you had there or growing up. It's sort of the small community that Houston embraces as its playground. So I will tell you that the sympathy is out there, but I think what underlies it all is that people want to see us get back on our feet and get healthy again.
Okay, thank you. Professor Bedient, in the slide that you listed with all of the text, 2 of the bullet points you listed have identified best management practices for land development and resettlement after disasters, and then address the disconnects between floodplain mapping and storm surge risk and the current building practices and the reality of surge flooding. Sorry to have to reread those, but in an area that lacks a comprehensive planning process, how do we think about incorporating some of these best practices? Should the metropolitan region, as we continue to grow, how can we plan and develop in a smart way?
Thanks for saving the easy question for me. I think that the hope here is that these big disasters are as the judge has said, there are lessons to be learned here. And it's not just exactly what's happening today, but the real concern we have within the research center are the 500 or so thousand folks that are slated to move into this area in the next, I don't know, 25 years according to HGAC statistics. And so how do you, and we're talking about down south of the Beltway 8. So how do you accommodate that group of folks coming down into that area? So it's a wonderful area, but how do you do that in a safe, manageable way? And it's not an easy answer, obviously. In other words, we need to get good, smart training and good, smart planning methodologies in place for the area. We need to make sure that there is evacuation capability for the roads. I don't know I've seen some of the plans for new roads in the next decade or 2 decades for that area, and they're not a lot of expansion in place, and yet all these folks are going to be moving in. So it's a flood-prone area, it's a surge risk area, and the concern we have is that if we don't begin to at least address some of these issues for those areas, we could have a real disaster on our hands. What the exact answer is, I don't know that as I sit here today, but over the next few years within the research center, we've got some very talented architects and land planners working with us within the center from both Rice and U of H, and we hope to address some of those issues directly.
Do you think there'll be any discussion about no-build zones as either part of natural ecosystem preservation or particularly flood-prone, surge-prone areas, saying these are limits, these are areas we know are going to be problematic, we need to avoid it?
Well, I would hope that there are areas down there now that are, obviously prone to very significant flooding. They're very low-lying areas that we probably should have some limits to development, or the development should be very specialized, be on stilts or whatever. And those areas, I think, offer up great opportunities for wetlands protection, preservation, recreational area, and all of that. And these are areas that are going to become more and more and more vital to the area just in general, because again we're losing a lot of these areas to 500,000 people that are going to be moving in. So it's all got to be planned, I think, and it needs to be carefully evaluated.
Raphael, I think you have some questions.
Yes,
from the audience.
I have gone through the audience questions and sort of sorted them out and regrouped them to recurring questions. And by far the most recurring question is a variation on what was just asked in the follow-up. So I would like to ask our 2 elected officials, starting with Judge Emmett. We know that there are neighborhoods that keep getting flooded and getting damaged again and again, whether by hurricanes or by rising water events of other types. Is it possible for government at any level to start buying out these properties in order to avoid that recurring problem?
Well, of course it's possible. Harris County Flood Control District's been buying out quite a number of properties for years. But to do it on a scale necessary to accomplish what needs to be accomplished, I don't see how you do that. It's going to be very, very difficult. I was going to ask Mayor a question because he may know the exact numbers, but you talk about growth in that area. The city of Galveston now is 47,000 according to the census. How many people now live in League City?
Oh, they're up in the 80 range.
So we have all these people moving to the mainland part of Galveston County and to the bay areas of Harris County. And by the way, the part that's unincorporated in Harris County, this is a little trivial fact that you'll find interesting. The unincorporated part of Harris County, taken by itself, would be the 7th largest city in the United States. And we have the same ordinance-making power as Loving County. We have 4 million people and they have 90 people. The other thing that I'm obviously pivoting off this question and answering what I wanted to be asked. Yes, this is the debate format. It's what you do all the time. Well, I'm glad you asked that, but what we really need to talk about is, you know, when you talk, did you just call me a politician? Somebody muttering up there. You've got to be careful. We have good ears, even though we're old. But we have to start addressing the broader question of what do we do as county government, because the cities are not going to annex these areas. They used to annex everything anytime a subdivision got built. They're not doing that now. So sooner or later we're going to have to address that question, and we've got to do that before we can even get to these other questions of how do we keep people from building in these low-lying areas.
Mayor Jaworski, would you want to, rather than ask you if it's possible, should we be doing more of that, and what level of government could do it there?
What an interesting question. So here's my take on it. I mean, we got to remember how we got here. You know, I mean, those Europeans, you know, came over in these small boats, and, you know, what are you going to do after 2 months in a boat like that? I mean, you're going to land right there and build something. You know, you don't want to walk too much inland. So that's how Galveston got started, and, you know, it became an urban center. I mean, it's got a true street grid worthy of any European capital, you know, and it was a beautiful place at one time. You know, how do you forget that? How do you say, I'm sorry, time up? So it's you know, we have to find a way to let people live there, because it is where the breezes are, it is where the beach is, it's where a natural deep water port that's going to become increasingly more relevant now that the Panama Canal is widening and large vessels don't want to have to go up the ship channel at great expense to dredge it to 50 feet. I mean, it's just a nightmare financially.
This may become a debate.
It will. and so Galveston remains relevant, and you need to have people that live there in order to service the hospitality community that if we do our job right, should continue to grow, to service the port complex that will inevitably be a partnership between Houston and Galveston, no matter what happens, obviously. And to serve the historical cradle of educating our physicians here in the state of Texas, University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. Don't forget Texas A&M, which is the only maritime academy on the Gulf Coast, and is a incredible growing entity within the city of Galveston. So San Antonio and Galveston are the only towns that have Tier 1 universities within the two major land grant universities within their borders. So this is a way of saying we need to move the properties up if need be. I think in terms of buying out land, you can't build on that. We had a little taste of that with the Texas GLO partnering with us to do FEMA buyouts on the far west end. I would like to see actually a sustainable way of renourishing our beaches so that those properties can stay on the tax roll. But those that took the buyout, part of the deal was you can never build on that land again. It either has to be a beach or a parking lot or a grassy knoll, So I'm mindful of the fact that Galveston needs population, not less population. It seems to me that we can buy homes that are underperforming, remove them, and then build homes that can withstand. Because let me tell you, the ones that were built properly, they did just fine. Breakaway walls did what they were supposed to do. Roofs stayed on. I'm mindful that this was not a huge wind event compared to what it could have been. But there is a way to build well and smart on Galveston.
That's the Brad Pitt solution.
Yeah, that's right.
And Dr. Bedient, another one of the questions from the audience that fits the next step in this discussion is controlling insurance the way to do it. If it's not about buyouts, is it about not insuring property that has already been damaged recurrently?
Or you're asking the wrong person there. I am not an insurance expert, and I don't even know how any of that works. I suspect.
Does anyone else want to take that?
Well, ask that again.
Yeah. If property buyouts are not the way, is controlling insurance in this damage area, in this recurrent damage areas, the way to avoid people from rebuilding in those areas.
Well, I mean, Judge, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that the flood policy has a maximum number of times you can tap it within a certain amount of time. So, practically speaking, but you know, it's amazing. People that ought to have known better and had the means to get it didn't have flood insurance. My favorite worst story is my former law partner who literally 4 months before Ike said, "Why am I paying for this flood policy? I've paid for this 20 years. I'm ditching it." Oh. And he was out there with a broom and a mop getting after it. God love him. I'll never forget. And I'm just telling you that flood is not going to be able to sustain this kind of, you know, payout. And I do believe after 2 or 3 payouts within a fairly minimum amount of years, you don't get it again. Windstorm, you know, price of poker just went up. My windstorm when I moved to Galveston 15 years ago was about $2,200. Same house, now it's $5,000. Now, you know, I can afford that this year, but you know, how many more people are going to be able to do that?
And this is a question from Hurricane Rita survivor in the answer, which basically comes from the opposite direction. Says, how can a property owner fight the practice of blanket condemnation of property resulting in takeover by government of, I assume, of flooded areas? What laws can be addressed in this quote-unquote civil rights violation? Who do the property owners turn to if this has occurred? I guess you're the lawyer in the panel, so.
Wow. Well, I mean, you know, there's ample attorneys that, for profit, will take opportunities like this to expand their client list. You know, I'm not entirely sure who you turn to. I mean, I think that, you know, that's the private market as far as attorneys go. They'll make themselves available if there's a need.
Judge Emmett, you made a comment about messaging in future storm events, and specifically using social network media to get the word out. What are you currently working on at county or regional level to start building some of that technology infrastructure for future messaging?
Interestingly enough, we've started looking at things like Facebook, and so far nobody's really signing up on it. I mean, it's not working. It's one of those things, I think, that, and this is just a guess, people still like TV and radio. I mean, in times of crisis, they're going to turn to television and radio. But I do believe you're going to see a lot more chatter on the social networks. And some of it will be accurate and some of it won't. And that's why it's going to be critical for organizations like our Office of Emergency Management to have a lot of people on there giving the right information. I confess, I read the blogs. You know, you shouldn't do that as somebody in government, particularly somebody who talks about the Astrodome, because all kinds of wrong things get said. But I think it's going to be incumbent upon people like us and the people who work for us to be on these social networks to make sure that wrong information isn't spiraling out of control. And so that's what I meant by getting into those social networks.
Let me comment on that also. At Rice, just because of what happened at Virginia Tech, we now have a system in place where for emergencies, everyone is signed in and gets a cell phone call if there's any kind of issue on campus, any kind of emergency that might be happening. This capability also exists for flood prediction and flood alert type systems. It's relatively standard procedure now to set these systems up such that if a bayou or if a surge area is getting to a certain level, that information can be immediately sent out on cell phones. So in other words, with so much of the population, especially during these events, being mobile and being out in cars and so on and so forth, that's another mechanism that exists for getting the word out.
If I could add to that, the social networking is something very important to me, and you know, we all use it in our campaigns. You know, Galveston's just the right size. I mean, Harris County is huge compared to us, obviously. And so, people in Galveston have a habit of tuning into the blogs of the Galveston County Daily News and the city's website and the city's, as we call it, Channel 16. So what we decided to do at our city website, cityofgalveston.org, is we have this deal, and I know other jurisdictions must as well, one call reaches all. So you can come in and put in this, up to 6 different contacts for yourself, whether it's a home number, a cell phone number, a pager, an email, a text, which I guess is your cell phone, and the message that we send out will go out both audio and in written form, and that's a certified note from the city. And then I liked the image, even though it's a lot less traumatic. Still, the freezes and the big blizzards up in the Northeast. They compared Mayor Bloomberg, the New Jersey Governor Christie, both of whom were on, well, Christie was on vacation. Bloomberg, they say, didn't handle the freeze too well. But that guy, Cory Booker, right, in Newark, he was out there in the blizzard with his cell phone tweeting, right? And he was telling people, where are you? I'll come to you. I'll bring the staff to you. And so, that was an extreme situation, but very admirable.
Judge Emmett, Mayor Jaworski, can you share what percentage of your staff is dedicated to hurricane preparedness and recovery, and also the budgets that are related to that? Any good guesses on that?
Well, I have a real good guess on mine, simply because we just voted on our budget yesterday. If you're talking about the county judge's office, it's about half. It's right at half. The Office of Emergency Management makes up half of the county judge's budget. But that's misleading, because if you go into, for example, Precinct 2, Commissioner Mormon's precinct, he's got a significant percentage of his staff that turns to, and of course, all of the county employees have roles, pretty much all of them, during a time of emergency. But on my staff particularly, it's 50%.
Okay, so Galveston in normal times has about 650 employees. We just laid off some police and fire to make up for the lack of sales tax and the loss of ad valorem property revenue. So we're down from our pre-Ike of 700 to about 650. Our annual budget that those 650 people comprise is about $90 million, $45 million general fund, $45 million enterprise funds like the water and sewer fees. So that's $90 million total for 650 employees. What would you say if I told you that the disaster money that we have received is over $500 million? So we have obviously had to farm some of that out. Our housing side of it is about half of that, $267 million. The non-housing side, we really don't have extra staff that we've hired, but we obviously have very good engineers who help us on any number of projects. But we gave some raises to some of our department heads, like the Housing and Grants fella, the Public Works guy, and they are working largely 15-hour days, 6 days a week at least. And there's some burnout, but most of these people are from Galveston, and they love their island, and they're going to bleed if they have to get the job done. But to answer your question, I mean, every single person for the city right now is involved in recovery. I mean, that's where we are, and we're going to be there for another 2 to 3 years at least.
Well, I think this has been just a fantastic series of presentations, comments, and questions. We'd like to extend our appreciation to those in the audience, but especially to the great people that are serving on our panelists. Thank you for your leadership and your instruction. And with that, let's pray for a good summer.
Right.